All right, welcome to Decentralized News, your weekly brief of the biggest stories affecting the cryptoverse. I'm your host, Piter. What's up, everybody? Joined as always by Ozzy. How are you?
Doing great, buddy. Excited for the show.
All right, let's get into it. Markets have been volatile. We're going to get into stories with Jay Powell and Jackson Hole meeting. Saw some volatility around that time anyway, and then also into the upside. And then to the downside on Sunday, there was a big sale. So the crypto market suffered a sudden and painful sell-off on Sunday. A whale sold 24,000 BTC in batch transactions a few hours apart at market value, so not over the counter or anything like that. At a market value of 2.7 billion. The BTC price moved suddenly 115 to 111. So nerves were also growing considering the whale behind the controversial transaction continues to own over 152,000 more BTC worth over 17 billion. So he's still got many more X's, to go, maybe another 10X ish less. The sale represents 1/1000th of the market cap, but the low volume on Sunday caused a 5% move. So interesting in and of itself, maybe a sign of you're still early. Do you see this move over the weekend?
Yeah, I saw the move, and it was kind of nuts to see just how quickly it moved, but also in some ways a sign of the times a bit. In one way, this is a better means more and better distribution of Bitcoin overall as this whale sold. Um,
Redistribution,
sorry.
a redistribution event.
Exactly. And you kind of always need to grind in certain price points for a while before Bitcoin can really get its next leg. You need people that either no longer have conviction or want to be taking profits at this range to rebalance their portfolios to do so. And it will take time for people to buy it up, and it it always hurts, especially if when they do it on a low volume day. This is kind of one of the downsides of trading 7 days a week, is that on Saturday, Sunday, and after trading hours, Bitcoin and most crypto can have much lower volume, and that results in bigger sell offs or bigger price impacts. And so,
Yeah, this was an interesting quote. The 1/1000th of the market cap of the 5% move. Yeah, just the fact that that's possible. Interesting stat in this story.
100%. It's interesting to see just,
A lot of the expos were giving the guy, like how could someone do something so stupid? And maybe another sign of that you are early, a person who doesn't. I mean, it's all speculation what the motivation was behind this, but giving someone all this flack who, they're just they're navigating the best they can, and if they need money, it's theirs to sell. I mean, it is what it is.
yeah, the decision making process feels a bit strange. Like I won't disagree. Selling in a on a low volume day like that, like
Yeah, so experts are coming out saying, "Oh, this is horrible, horrible timing," but we're not all experts out here. I'm one.
yeah, we're not all experts. That is absolutely true, and I guess in some ways it makes sense. Like it might be why they chose to sell. Then they might have wanted to have that price impact to maybe add a bit of fear into the market. It's
Yeah.
definitely something that has happened before. So,
Yeah, there was also speculation they were moving it to ETH. It's kind of the ETH turning the cycle, but who knows? I mean, it's all speculation. But interesting story. Just gets you thinking about the market as a whole. Before we get it, when we get to macro, we'll talk about the Jackson Hole speech that moved the markets. But let's get into a couple other stories. There's a story out of Reuters. It's all like sources say kind of a story, but important in the broader context. Reuters is reporting, quote, China is considering allowing the usage of a yuan-backed stablecoins for the first time to boost wider adoption of its currency globally. Sources familiar with the matter said in a major reversal of its stance towards digital assets. Quote, again, these are just more quotes. The State Council, China's cabinet, will review and possibly approve a roadmap later this month for greater usage of the currency globally, including catching up with the U.S. push on stablecoins, according to sources. Um, Interesting though, China's plan for the use of stablecoins, if approved, would mark a major shift. The country banned cryptocurrency famously in 2021, but China has long aspired for the yuan to achieve, more status. The yuan's These are some interesting stats that came out of the story. The yuan's share as a global payment fell to 2.88%, its lowest in 2 years. So it was gaining ground, you know, not so much in recently, according to payment platform Swift. In contrast, U.S. dollar commands 47%. Another very interesting stat. Maybe this is just me speculating, but the story seems to imply is this a response to pressure from the Genius Act and growing acceptance and attention on stablecoins just in general?
I mean,
For Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, the greater acceptance of stablecoins definitely makes some sense. That would that would have an impact.
Like, was it successful? Is this Genius Act already a success? Like, it's pushing adoption forward. Like, if this story is true, and it would be a pretty big deal. I mean, stablecoins seem to be like the killer DApp this cycle. A lot of talk around stablecoins.
I mean, there are a lot of talks about them. Do I think China is making this move specifically because of the Genius Act? I don't necessarily think so. They have been and have discussed CBDCs before this. Um,
Right.
pretty famously, they were talking about CBDCs in a major way before even the U.S. was talking about
And
CBDCs.
none of the story mentions CBDCs, but it's a good point. I mean, is this just a Chinese CBDC? Is that what this will end up being? It's a fair
In
question.
many ways, a stablecoin produced by a government is essentially a CBDC. And so,
I mean, it have to be, I guess, by definition, issued by the central bank. So we'll see how they go with this.
yeah, they would have, unless they do something
The big
majorly
stable coins
different.
are private companies right now.
Exactly.
USDC, and they're not government stable coins.
Yeah. And so, to me, in many ways, this is just showing okay, they're considering moving forward with this because they're seeing what the success is the US with with the with stablecoins and how they're helping the US gain more adoption of their currency. Not necessarily the Genius Act, because there hasn't necessarily been anything that has come out of the Genius Act yet
No,
to
but this next story kind of pigtails in it as well because, okay, so what is China going to do? Is it going to be a central bank, or is it going to be in some other way a government backed, or but not central bank? So the story out of Wyoming, the U.S. state of Wyoming this week has announced the mainnet launch of its own stablecoin, the Frontier Stable Token. It is the first fiat backed, fully reserved stablecoin issued by a public entity in the U.S. Not a central bank, though. But it's an eye-catching development given that traditional stablecoins are issued by private companies, like we mentioned. It's going to be run day to day by the Wyoming Stable Token Commission, which was established more than 2 years ago through the Wyoming Stablecoin Act. So this is a sign of more advancement in our regulation compared to China, potentially. Like these kind of things happening on petri dish levels, like at the state level. Anyway, so what's it gonna mean? So Tether earns revenue, right? They buy treasuries, earn revenue. So there's potential revenue in here somehow, but the earnings are going to go to the Wyoming School Foundation program, so it's going to help the schools. Now, how big of an impact? I don't know, but the population of Wyoming is under 600,000 people. It is the least populous state in the union. Has huge landmass, like 10th largest state, but not a lot of people. So, an interesting petri dish. And it's an example of a state coin, government, not central bank.
yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, it's pretty interesting to see Wyoming do this. Being the smallest state, I think even any kind of adoption will have a much greater outsized impact than if you were to do it in New York, Texas, Florida, because any revenue generated is divided by a much smaller group of people and a much smaller number of schools. or at least school budget. And so that is pretty interesting. And to me, what's also makes this a interesting model is it could allow for people to support causes that they believe in, fund, kind of direct a bit of their tax dollars, if you think about this in a kind of governmental sense. Because let's say instead of Wyoming just having one stablecoin, they have the Frontier USD.
Stablecoin that is for specific to fund another project.
Yeah. So let's say each state has one for healthcare, one for education, one for, I don't know, funding a specific construction project or environmental goal, and the
Like
revenue
use this
from
Stablecoin to fund this project, basically.
yeah, they
Like
use the revenue from that coin to fund it. And so it could be one way for voters to that are into crypto to support in different ways. And so
or incentives with their feet, sort of like where they spend their money, how they
yeah.
spend their money.
Yeah, and so to me it's one way that is interesting. Governments could look at funding themselves and determining which projects can move forward or generate a bit more funding for their education system just by using stablecoins and or promoting the use of their stablecoins. Because it could even be like, hey, where there's some announcement goes out that they're short $30,000 in funding for schools in order for XYZ to happen. And announcement goes out on Twitter or wherever, and people go out to make an effort to go use that stable coin in order to support that specific goal rather than just giving giving $100. Because now when you give $100, you're giving up you're giving up purchasing power. Whereas with a stable coin and just using that stable coin for any normal transaction that you would be doing, you're actually not giving up any dollars, but still supporting that cause.
Budget neutral. Well,
But budget neutral for sure.
it'll be interesting to watch how this plays out. I mean, it's a small state, it's a small market, but will it get used? Will be fun to watch. All right, we got a few more adoption stories before we get into macro. Norway's sovereign wealth fund. This is the largest state-directed wealth fund in the world, so important for that reason. Increased its indirect Bitcoin exposure by 192% over the last year. So they had a report come out about what they're investing in. So the fund has indirect exposure to a little over 7,000 BTC through its portfolio, which includes treasury companies, Strategy and MetaPlanet, and crypto exchange Coinbase. So it's including Coinbase as Bitcoin exposure, which is interesting. But anyway, one of the biggest, and they don't own Bitcoin directly, but more exposure to it. Then there was a story out of Canada, your home. Air Canada pension fund revealed 161 million Bitcoin allocation. So this represents just 0.77 of their portfolio, of a $21 billion portfolio. But, it's being called notable because the biggest pension fund in Canada is not investing in Bitcoin. So they're kind of like the mainstream. Like, what is the mainstream doing? The Canada Pension Plan Investment Board, the CPP, they have a huge behemoth, $714 billion portfolio, has not. Now, according to the article I read, Air Canada is taking a very conservative approach, a small amount that they're going to hold for a long time to prevent concerns about volatility. And they're just going to, I believe it said they're just going to do ETF and not take the risk of holding it themselves. So, as far as getting a pension, it's still a pretty conservative way to go about it, but interesting nonetheless. It was kind of hard to find information about this story because there's a big strike going on there in Canada.
Yeah, the strike seems to be just ending. Fingers crossed. But I mean, I've got a couple comments because the comments about CPP and the Canadian pension fund plan isn't investing in Bitcoin. That's because it's the largest government pension plan. So it's essentially a bigger version of Social Security. So
Mm,
in the US, so Social Security in the US government does not invest in Bitcoin
right.
right now. And so it's not a private pension fund. And while there are some of the biggest private pension funds in Canada are, including the Ontario Teachers Pension Fund. They were one of the first and one of the largest pension funds to get into Bitcoin fairly early on. Air Canada is a decent sized pension fund, and there are many other pension funds within Canada that are invested. Currently, the governmental pension plans, including CPP, QPP, Canadian public servants pension funds, aren't invested in Bitcoin. So it's a bit of a difference, but interesting
Well,
to
and
see Air Canada getting.
1% is considered, or they're describing at least as conservative, right? So you start extrapolating, and it's like, okay, if every pension fund put 1% into Bitcoin, you're starting to talk about a lot of money. If X percentage of pension funds, private pension funds, start putting 1% into Bitcoin, 10% of them, 20% of them, you're starting to talk about. I mean, I haven't done math on it, but yeah, I can imagine those numbers start to get pretty big.
Yeah. Oh, the math can get really, really big. And that's why if Bitcoin can continue to be adopted as a kind of long term wealth strategy or and financial tool, these pension funds hopping on board will potentially push it to that $1 million by 2031 price range that a lot of people have talked about. Michael
Yeah, that's probably
Saylor
a good
primarily.
argument for like decreased volatility, the diminishing returns, decreased volatility kind of idea that as Bitcoin gets older, those two things will happen. Seems to support that. Maybe limit the downside with all these institutional investors and investments like these that are like, okay, we're going to hold it for a long time, conservative amount. Yeah. But that's not this. We got one more adoption story before we jump into the macro and the JPOW. Kazakhstan approved Central Asia's first spot Bitcoin ETF, and it's already live. So, BitGo, a U.S. regulated crypto custodian, will safeguard assets for the Central Asia's first spot Bitcoin exchange, which debuted Wednesday on the international exchange in Kazakhstan. So, like, where is Central Asia? Just got me wondering. I mean, this is like south of Russia, east of Ukraine, west of China, north of Iran, Kazakhstan. I can't pronounce Uzbekistan, Georgia, Armenia. I can't, I really,
Yeah,
I
there's ton. It's very much the
not
region
things I've never
south
really
of
heard of.
Russia, like west of or no east of China or west of China, east of Turkey. So it's a bunch of former USSR states that were part of the USSR for the most part, just north of kind of the Middle East. If you think Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan,
Afghanistan,
Pakistan.
Pakistan. Yeah, it's all right there.
So
So
that's kind of where it is. It's a small and relatively economically poor region. Definitely
landlocked.
landlocked, very kind of economically suppressed because of their history as being part of the Soviet Union, but they are getting their first Bitcoin ETF. And so it's
Exciting.
it's exciting for the region, potentially gives them some more exposure, better exposure to Bitcoin than they could previously. And so good for the region, and hopefully it can help generate some more economic opportunity in a region that definitely lacks some of that opportunity.
All right, cool. Let's jump into the macro. I mean, we're talking about the Fed meeting. So the markets moved suddenly on the day that Jerome Powell spoke at Jackson Hole, which is, it's an annual event. I remember, like, it seemed like it really kicked off the bear market, this last bear market. It was like, okay, we're raising rates, and they started raising rates right after. It was like, seemed like it was right after Jackson Hole. Don't quote me on that. But, I watched the speech, and it seemed like it was more hype, and now it's calmed down a little bit, like how much he really said. But he basically went on, talked about tariffs and inflation, the uncertainty and unemployment, the uncertainty, but the baseline outlook moving forward, quote, may warrant adjusting our policy stance. That's pretty much all he said about it.
It's not.
But like, it wasn't that dovish to me. I don't know. But I mean, what is it? The story narrative follows price action. Not the, you can prescribe a narrative. So how much of it was that? It seems like the markets have calmed down. I mean, the outlook was before his speech was 83% chance of a cut. It's a couple days after the speech now, or a day, whatever. A couple days. No, what are we? A week after it? When was
There
the
were rough,
speech?
less than a week, but like 4 days.
There's a day or something like that. But we're at 86% chance of a rate cut. So it hasn't moved that much since before and after the speech.
No, it hasn't moved significantly. I think more of what this has to do with is at least partially the other macro data that came out and some of the fear that came out before Jackson Hole and then kind of being calmed a little bit by this speech. So some other news that did come out last week was PPI. It came up very
Really?
hot,
Yeah.
very hot. Came in at 3.3%, which is up from 2.3% just over a year ago.
And then
Um,
the interesting way that I heard PPI described was downwind inflation. So potentially more inflation in the future, like CPI data or PCE data.
Absolutely, because PPI data is all about the cost to produce different goods within the US. And so
The
if
producer price index.
exactly. And so if the cost to produce a good in the US goes up, then within a
It
certain amount of
implies
time,
manufacturer. It implies before gets to retail. It's got to kind of go through its distribution or logistical phase, basically.
it once it goes into its logistical phase, it it still has to reach the market. And once it reaches the market, then will they'll have to increase costs to meet the increased cost to produce the good if they're going to maintain their profit margin, generally speaking. And most companies like to maintain their profit margin. And so PPI going up, especially so much higher than inflation, than the 2% target, means that there's going to be a cost somewhere down the line that gets pushed to consumers. And that might be long for certain products that maybe there's a lot of stocking things, the low turnover, and for other products that are quick turnarounds might be much quicker impact on CPI. And so PPI usually lags by at least a couple of months, but this definitely put a scare in on the market that was looking for whatever sign they could about whether we were going to be getting a cut in September or not. And so initiated a ton of fear in the market just before Jackson Hole, and that's why the market so hard on comments that there may be a change, that a change may be warranted. That
I got you.
overreaction has calmed down a little bit, but
Well, it like a lot. I mean, I'm looking at the market today. We're down another 2-3%. Bitcoin 9 ETH all the way down to 43. So yeah, was it really the pivot? We'll see.
oh,
Interesting.
I think if you look at it, it might not have been the pivot, but it does provide a bit of that. Okay, we rallied quite hard on Friday from the comments, and but it has these fears are still pushing us down the range that we were at the low from before the Jackson Hole comments. So
Well, we
we're
still got some data, important data coming between now and the meeting. We get PCE inflation numbers, and next week and unemployment the week after. So a couple of Fridays in a row. We'll see how this affects markets. See what the inflation numbers say on Friday, or this Friday. Yeah, few days away from that one.
absolutely. I think it'll be interesting to see. I have a hard time seeing Bitcoin really breaking too far below current levels because we
The bull
spent
market support band, like as long as we stay above that, I think it's below 100, like above 95, somewhere in there. There's been a lot of speculation we're gonna retest that bull market support band
that
September-ish.
that would
September is
make
notorious
sense
peak
to
season out.
to me. Below the 100K mark would be very
Yeah,
bearish for the market.
psychologically, but it would still we would still technically be like doesn't necessarily mean the cycle's over, I guess.
No, it doesn't mean the cycle's over. Absolutely. I think it also just is very unlikely based off of all of the volume that we built up in the just above the 100K region. If you look at the kind of 102 to 108K range, even, we built up a lot of volume between May and now in that range. And so breaking below that would be pretty significant. It feels likely that we probably do go test that range as people are still a little bit fearful on whether that decision is going to be made to start cutting rates or not, and whether we're going to start seeing the impacts of the tariffs in the US and throughout the world in the next coming months. While certain places have been feeling it already, whether it really starts showing in PPI data and CPI data is yet to be seen. And so could that be causing some of that fear in the market?
Yeah, you do you DCA into Bitcoin at these levels? Now they're over 100. You still buying?
A little bit. I
My dubious speculation, like my gut or like the way I'm feel about the market right now. This is just please do your own research. Oh my gosh, don't listen to me. Like this dip and the levels around right now is wherever this kind of bottoms out will be next bear market's kind of bottom ish. Like so, like I don't know. It feels like oh, I feel comfortable. I mean, I'm always DC. I always like to DCA Bitcoin as much as I can. God willing, I'm able to. But when I put it in that perspective, you know,
yeah,
makes me more
I
comfortable DCAing. And me personally, it's kind of like how I view the market. But let's get in a speed run before anyone takes a chance of listening to anything I have to say about price prediction.
that's fair. Let's look at that speed run. Chainlink is starting to use some of their revenue for token buybacks, so a little bit of bullish activity for Chainlink, and a token that's always kind of struggled to perform price wise despite pretty high interest usage of the protocol throughout
It's been
throughout the years.
outperforming. I'm not sure the last few days, but like seems to be one of the few tokens that's it's not keeping up with ETH, outperforming ETH. I have to look at the ETH link chart, but yeah, and I think the buyback narrative for protocols will be, assuming an alt season will be a narrative that we hear more about. So Aave is also in the news. They will soon get 7% of the World Liberty financial supply. So they're getting a big chunk of the Trump family's DeFi project. I think, sure what you call it. But it is reportedly going to be 1 billion at pre-market prices. So Aave staying relevant. Let's see, and then finally we got Polygon CEO. We'll do an AMA coming up. So making some action there, revealing the project's roadmap next week. So if you're into the Pole token, formerly Matic, maybe you want to scope that out, check it out.
Definitely worth seeing. It will also be interesting just with everything that their vision was regarding, the ag layer and FI liquidity. Whether some of this
I'm gonna focus
roadmap will generate some attention or not.
like actual usage of the ag layer. Like, is that going to start happening? Like functional and live and being used.
Absolutely, I think that
There's a certain level of other protocols, people having to adopt it. It seems like so. As much as they want to hype it until others are using it, right?
yeah. Oh, I mean, yes and no. They can also hook their protocol into other layers and other chains without the other chain necessarily
Permissionless.
needing to be there. But there it'll be interesting. I'm always intrigued to see what's on the roadmap for all of these chains and all of the different protocols. But that's a wrap for this week. Lots of
Thanks
stories,
for
but
watching advice to your own research. We are educational sometimes and entertainment purposes only. So be careful out there.
oh, absolutely, be very careful, safeguard your funds, and do your own research. Thanks for watching, everyone.